Good afternoon. House Democrats this week want to highlight the importance of quality public education in Missouri and some of our ideas for strengthening Missouri's K-12 education system and making sure local public schools have the resources needed to successfully carry out the vital role of educating Missouri's children. Local public schools form the foundation of every Missouri community, and when that foundation cracks, the whole community feels it. For our communities and state to thrive, we must strengthen the public education foundation and avoid policies that could cause it long-term harm. Meeting our statutory obligations to adequately fund public education always has been and will always be a top priority for Democrats. Doing the minimum is not enough. Not only must we increase our financial commitment to our schools, we must prevent the diversion of taxpayer resources from public education through tuition vouchers. And although alternatives to traditional local public schools can have a place in our public education system, these alternatives shouldn't be imposed on from high and instead be implemented only in local communities that want them and be held to the same standards of accountability. The bills we are discussing today are ideas that reflect the Democratic Party values. The first bill we'd like to highlight is a bill that I have filed, House Bill 629, which will be filed here in just a few minutes. This bill simply states that if a charter school is going to come into a new community, the expansion must go to a vote of the people. We believe in local control, and this bill hopefully will move forward to bring that. I want to turn it over real quickly to Representative Kendrick to discuss the K-12 funding in our budget.
Great, thank you. So the governor's recommendation had a new decision item for the foundation formula, a little over $61 million. That would put us fully funding the foundation formula as the foundation formula is currently written. As you'll remember, a few years ago, we moved the goalposts on foundation formula. So a lot of people will talk about we are fully funding the foundation formula. And while that's correct, we also need to focus on the fact that when you look at per capita spending on K-12 education, we're in the 40s right now. When you look at state and local, not just state support, but also look at local support, we're around 25th in the nation, so about middle of the pack. What that means is there are great disparities across the entire state. Richer, wealthier communities are able to put forward more local support and are able to help their teachers, pay their teachers more, and more adequately fund education. But where I grew up in Northeast Missouri, rural Missouri, the tax base is less, and less support coming in locally to support their schools. So by the state not living up to a higher share of the portion of K-12 education, we're just creating further disparities across the state. And that doesn't get at the school transportation funding formula either. The governor's recommendation included $10 million new decision item for school transportation. That doesn't come anywhere close to adequately funding. As it's currently written in statute, we're well underfunding that by well over $100 million. And need to address that issue. I mean, as everyone knows, 4-day school weeks are a serious situation. The first school district went to a 4-day school week in 2011. I fully suspect by the end of 2019, we're talking over 30 school districts are at a 4-day school week. I think we're at 25 year to date, and many school districts are looking to contract their school week down to 4 days. So that's a growing issue. So when we're talking about fully funding the foundation formula, we need to look at that in perspective on what the state's doing.
Thank you, Kip. And I'm going to turn it over to Representative Judy Morgan to talk about a legislation that she's filed.
Thank you, and hello to everyone. Thank you for being here today. My piece of legislation will be a House Joint Resolution, which will actually put a constitutional amendment on the ballot for the citizens of Missouri to vote on, I believe in November of 2020. And it has to do with our foundation formula, and it would do two things. One, it would establish that we have to provide an adequate and equitable education for every kid in the state of Missouri. And the second thing it would do, it would change from 25% the amount of funding for public education K-12 to 33%. Just a couple of notes on both of these. In terms of the percentages, we've looked back and we think that for at least 20 years, the legislature has been funding at 33%. So we would like to see that set as a constitutional amendment. And secondly, we believe that if we set that bar higher, if we say 33% rather than 25, the legislature has been funding more. If we set it at 33, then maybe they will do even better for the kids of Missouri and fund it at a better rate. In terms of the adequate and equitable education, it may surprise you to know this is not part of our Constitution. This issue has gone to court, and courts have said that we are not required to provide an adequate and equitable education for every kid in Missouri. And that's just something that we as Democrats very strongly feel that all of our kids need, and parents need to know that their kids are getting an adequate and equitable education. And I believe the number is going to be HJR 26. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Representative Deb Lavender. She's going to discuss a bill filed by Representative Bruce Franks.
Hi, thanks again for being here. Representative Franks wasn't able to be with us, so he asked me if I'd fill in for him. A bill that he has is House Bill 424. We've discussed this on the House floor in the past. It's asking charter schools for accountability. So right now, if you're interested in opening a charter school, you may do that. Inside of the St. Louis area, we know that 50% of the charter schools that open fail within the first couple of years. And so as that's pulling money out of our public school systems, we'd like there to be a target that they need to meet to be able to continue to do that. So we have an adequacy ability to check and see if they're doing their jobs. If you have sponsored schools that are failing schools, this bill also includes that you will not be able to sponsor another charter school if indeed you still have a school that's not meeting standards. Thank you.
Thank you. And last, I'd like to turn it over to Representative Ian Mackey.
Thank you. Representative Rachel Prouty and I have filed legislation to end lunch shaming in our public schools. My bill is 627, hers is 618. This is a bill that addresses the stigmatization and shaming that goes on when a child qualifies for free and reduced lunch and is singled out either with a different colored punch card, a wristband, some sort of identifying factor that allows the person in charge of collecting money to know who's on free and reduced lunch. It also happens to let their peers know who's on free and reduced lunch. There are also measures in this legislation to make it so that the person who's in charge of collecting the money takes any issues up with back due amounts with the parents and not with the students. Right now, students who are in line for lunch are basically shaken down for their back due amounts. This bill requires that any conversations about money that's owed to the school is taken up with the parents. And lastly, it requires that students are fed. It doesn't matter how far behind a student is. If the student is at lunch, the student should be fed. And the student should be fed the same meal that any other student's being fed in the school. So, thank you.
Thank you. Education is not just about workforce development, but making sure that we have well-informed citizens throughout Missouri. The Democratic Caucus will continue to work to bring equitable and quality education to all of our kids. And with that, we'll take any questions.
You mentioned opposition to tuition vouchers. Are you expecting that to come up in Republican legislation?
You know, I personally have not heard a lot of rumblings about that yet. It was something that came up the past two sessions that, you know, was a priority, I believe, in years past. I have not personally heard that it will be at this point, but we are always going to be watching it.
A report from DESE showed that 78.5% of teachers, K-12 teachers in Missouri, are female, and that 93% are white. Is there anything on the state level to try to introduce some more diversity in the teaching industry in Missouri?
I have not seen any legislation. I don't know if anyone else has, but I think that's a very valuable point. Our kids need to see folks who look like them teaching them in the classroom, and obviously different perspectives bring different benefits to our kids, so I would definitely be in support of something like that.
The same report also showed some problems with retention in teachers and some shortages in several fields, including the STEM fields. Any comment on that?
Well, I think it's no secret that our teachers are very underpaid when you compare us to other states. We have a long way to go. And so when we're talking about highly qualified folks that need to stick around for our kids, it's difficult when our very teachers are on state assistance and trying to go into a classroom and teach. So I think that is probably the number one issue that we need to be talking about when it comes to retention for our teachers. Definitely, go ahead.
May I just add something? I was in the classroom for a long time and then represented, as union president, teachers and school employees, but pay is a big issue for retention, but there's some other issues too. In surveys you look at, teachers say they're concerned about discipline in the schools, they're concerned about support from their administration, and some of these things. So although we have to address the pay issue, it's very important. There are some other issues in terms of retention that we need to address too.
How do you address pay from a state top-down level? Isn't that a local issue?
Well, we have actually established a statewide minimum pay, so, you know, that could be done. That could be done. That statewide minimum could be increased.
Leader Quaid, I
Yes.
have two questions, one for you and one for Representative Kendrick.
Okay.
First of all, again, explain what the bill would do that you have about charter schools going to vote with people. And then for Representative Kendrick, you were talking about the 4-day school week and the additional schools going there. Is that primarily because of the transportation costs?
Sure. So the bill that I filed today does exactly what I said. It's places that we don't have charter schools currently, so that's excluding Kansas City and St. Louis where there's are already in existence. If charter schools expand, it will go to a vote of the people for approval to do so. I definitely believe that our education system needs to be at a local level. Nobody knows better than our local teachers and parents about what is best for their kiddos. And so if we're going to be expanding a system that doesn't necessarily have the accountability measures that we all believe in, then we need to make sure that the parents actually want it.
Yeah, anecdotally, I mean, I would say the conversations I've had with district leaders in 4-day school week areas indicate that transportation is one of the primary, if not the main reasons why they chose to go to 4-day school week. There's a mandate to get every kid to school as there should be, but we need to make sure that we're doing everything within our power as a state to fund it to the legal and statutory requirement that we have set in statute, which we're currently not doing. 10 million new decision item, the $10 million is a start. We need to see what we can to do more. And as I mentioned earlier, while the foundation formula, hopefully we can get the $61 million this year and potentially more to the foundation formula. But while the foundation formula would be fully funded, I think we need to question whether or not that is adequate funding for our state support for local school districts.
Kip, is it your position as a caucus that a 4-day school week is a bad idea?
Well, you'll talk to school board members, to school leaders out there who say, and some communities have been open to the idea of a 4-day school week. I think that as a state, we need to have a real conversation about, is that the best policy for school districts and for children in order to be adequately educated and to be able to compete in the 21st century workforce. I think that there is a lack of data out there currently that exists that would show that a 4-day school week does not negatively impact a child's ability to learn. We just need to have a real conversation about what is forcing these school districts into a 4-day school week. I think that if we were to adequately fund the foundation formula as well as the school transportation formula, I suspect that many of those districts would choose to reverse that decision.
I have a question about the school lunch bill.
Sure.
Some school districts, including Columbia, are introducing some new procedures where if a child's unpaid lunch balance is over $50, it gets transferred to a collection agency. Does your bill address that in any way?
I was not aware that that was happening. That's horrible. Yeah, I've not been aware of any. Do you know of that? I've not heard of that happening. The instances I've had have mostly revolved around students being singled out in the lunch line. No, I'm not aware of that happening. That's something that certainly I feel like Representative Prouty and I would both be in agreement with addressing that.
Leader Quaid, you want to use education is not just about workforce development. Obviously, the governor's talked a lot about workforce development. So do you have any concerns with shifting the workforce development things into the higher ed department? Is that something that concerns you?
It's definitely a concern. I am happy that we're having discussions around workforce development. It's something that I believe all of my caucus members are in favor of, that conversation. But when we are not adequately funding the basics, the things that we promised we would, to have these other new things, Someone told me a story the other day. It's like when your car's broken down on the side of the road and somebody comes by with an ice cream cone. You're happy about that ice cream cone, that's great, but your car's still broken. And I think that when we're discussing these issues, we need to be looking at the broken car as well.
I have a question for Representative Morgan. Does your proposal include a definition for adequate and equitable?
There's not actually a definition in the bill.
How, do you have a way that, be able to define what that is to make sure the state would be meeting that goal?
Well, I think we probably saw something over on the Kansas side. Sometimes those things do go through court, but, to me, adequate and equitable means that, kids are getting the same kind of education across the state. I recently went to my grandson's school, and it's a great school, and I was just amazed with the amenities, but not all schools in the state of Missouri can provide that. Every kid in the state of Missouri should have the same equitable education, and certainly we should adequately fund it. What Representative Kendrick brought up with the funding of the school transportation, that's certainly not adequate funding, that we're $188 million short. So, I think there's a body of knowledge around what adequate and equitable would be.
Did you measure that through outcomes or inputs?
It could be both, it could be a combination, kind of like our, accreditation system is.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you all so much for coming.